In this tutorial video we're going to see how to browse an array using a loop. Now for those of you who watched the previous video on how to declare and initialize an array, I briefly explained that when you wanted to print out the results or the values of your elements in your array, you would tend to use a loop structure instead of having to, for example, type lots of printout instructions. If you had, I don't know, 10 elements, so you wouldn't have to type out 10 printout instructions. So in this first step we're going to see how to use the while loop to do that. The while loop structure is not the recommended structure for arrays. That would be the for loop structure, but we'll see that in the next step. So to do this, first of all, obviously we need to create an array. So let's do that now. So this is the type of array plus its name, like so. And then the type of elements we're going to be using in our array. So we're going to be using integer elements and for elements. Okay, and now let's assign some values to these elements at the corresponding indices. So and now the final element. Okay. So now we have our array with values assigned to the elements. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do our while loop. Now to start off with, we're going to create a variable named, let's say I for example, and that I will be assigned a value of 0. Now I is going to play the role of our counter. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, once I've actually written out the code. So I is equal to 0. So I is set at 0. So now we're going to start our while loop. So like so. While I is inferior to 4, 4 being the number of elements, obviously. And let's open up the brackets here. We want to print out the following sentence. At index, then we want to add the variable I, then continue our sentence. And at the end we want to add our array as well as the variable I. Okay. And then we want to obviously increment I, otherwise I will never move, so the loop will never meet its condition. And then don't forget to close the brackets of your loop. Eclipse has already done it automatically. So basically we have our counter I, which is at a value of 0. So I is going to play the role of a counter. So as long as I doesn't reach 4, we're going to print out this sentence. Now this sentence is, if you read it, at index. So I is also going to play the variable of the indices, because I starts off at 0, then it's going to go to 1, 2 and 3, and once it reaches 4 the loop will shut off. And then at the end here we're going to also be displaying the results of the elements according to, again, their indices, which is I. And then at the end here we have the incrementation of I, so I can reach 4, otherwise the loop will have an infinite loop. So let's try this to see if it works. Okay. and as you can see, yeah, I forgot a little space here. Well, it doesn't really matter. Add it if you want. At index 0, our array we have the value of 100. At index 1 of our array we have the value of 200. So I plays the role of our counter and of the role of the indices. So that's how to use a that's how to browse an array using a while loop. In the next step, I'm going to show you how to use a for loop to do this. So now we're going to see how to use a for loop to browse our array. So the for loop structure is the recommended structure to use when browsing an array. So we're going to keep the same array we created in the first example, first step. So this is our array with the values of the elements here. Now we can create our for loop. So let's open up our for loop structure here. Same principle, we're going to have a counter I, which is also going to play the role of the indices, of the variable of the indices. So again, we want to set it to 0, and then the condition of our loop, so until I reaches 4, and then we want to increment I obviously so that it doesn't stay at 0, like so. Open up the brackets, and then our instruction, which is same sentence, same instruction as before. So at index, add the variable I, then continue by adding the sentence, the rest of the sentence of our array we have, like so, and then add the array as well as the variable I, like so. So this is the same principle as for the while structure. We've initialized a variable named I, which is going to play the role of a counter and of the variable of the indices. Until I reaches 4, we want to repeat the loop, and then we have the incrementation of I, so that I is always adding 1 until it can reach 4. And then this is the instruction, same as before. So let's test this out. Okay. And as you can see, it works perfectly. Now I'm just going to talk about a point that's quite important here. You're probably asking yourself, well, when we do our loop, whether it be a while loop or for loop, what happens if we don't know the number of elements of our array? Because here we know that we have 4 elements because we created the array ourselves. But what happens if we don't know how many elements there are? Well, there's a neat method in Java that you'll see in the next couple of videos, hopefully, and this method is called length. So to use it, and well, I should explain what length does. Length basically tells you how long your array is, or how big it is, how many elements it has inside it. So to use it, it's quite simple. In the condition of your loop, instead of typing as long as I is inferior to the number of elements, you type the name of your array, so like so, dot, and then length. That's the name of the method. I've written it wrong, like so. So basically this reads out as long as I is inferior to the length of your array, so length is going to determine how long your array is automatically, the loop will continue executing, or will continue repeating. So again, if we launch this, we should get the same results, as you can see. So this is the method, the length method, that you use when you don't know how many elements you have in your array.